Her door was always locked, a bright red door, as if warning the entire neighborhood that anyone who dared to approach would be devoured whole. That was the first thing I noticed when I moved into this quiet little town in Oregon. The house next door was old, weathered, its paint peeling like it had given up on life long ago. But the door? That door was red, an almost defiant red, as if it had something to prove. I had no interest in my neighbors. At 72, I had perfected the art of solitude. Mornings were for coffee and newspapers on my porch. Evenings were for whiskey and pretending I wasn't waiting for something, though what, I couldn't say. But the house next door, that red door, it got under my skin. No one ever came in or out. The mailbox remained empty, the curtains drawn tight. The only sign of life was the faint glow of a lamp in the evenings. It became a mystery I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. Until one morning, I found a note under my doormat. Just a single line, written in elegant cursive. Have you ever felt like a character in someone else's story? I stared at it baffled. A prank? A mistake? I glanced at the red door, half expecting it to blink back at me. The next morning, another note appeared. Do you think people ever truly know who they are? Or do they just play the roles they think they should? I scoffed. I had spent my whole life playing the role I thought I was supposed to. Husband, father, soldier, widower. Wasn't that what life was? A series of parts we played until the curtain finally closed? By the third day, I was expecting it. If you could rewrite one chapter of your life, which would it be? That one hit harder than I expected. I folded the note, slipping it into my pocket, and stared at the red door. Could it be her? The reclusive woman next door, Miss Eleanor, the town's whispered legend. I grabbed a notepad and scribbled my own response. Depends. Are we talking about rewriting the past, or just adding footnotes? I hesitated for only a second before slipping my note under her door. And then I waited. The next morning, no note appeared. I won't lie, I was disappointed. For the past few days, those little slips of paper had been the most interesting part of my routine. But as I sat on my porch, staring at that damn red door, I heard something that made the hair on my arms stand up. A laugh. Low, rich, and full of amusement. Then the mail slot creaked, and a note fluttered to the ground. Perhaps life isn't about rewriting. Perhaps it's about reading between the lines. That was it. I'd had enough of riddles. I marched across the yard and knocked. Silence. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. I sighed, pressing my forehead against the door. Look, lady, I don't know if you're running some kind of philosophy club, but I'd rather not be your only member. The door creaked open, and there she was. Eleanor wasn't the frail old woman I had pictured. She stood tall, her silver hair twisted into a loose bun, her sharp blue eyes glinting with something I couldn't quite place. Amusement, maybe. Or a challenge. You finally knocked, she said, voice smooth as silk. You finally answered, I shot back. Her smirk deepened. Come in, then. I hesitated. A part of me, the part that had spent decades keeping people at arm's length, wanted to turn around and pretend none of this had happened. But curiosity won. Her house was nothing like I expected. Bookshelves lined the walls, overflowing with novels and manuscripts. Old typewriters sat on side tables, their keys worn from use. The whole place smelled like aged paper and cinnamon tea. Tea? She offered. Whiskey? I countered. She laughed, a real, genuine laugh, and to my surprise, she pulled out a bottle and poured us each a glass. I liked her already. Settling into an armchair, I took a sip. So, Eleanor, what's with the notes? You got some kind of existential crisis, or am I just lucky enough to be your latest experiment? She tilted her head, watching me like I was a puzzle she was trying to solve. Tell me, Frank, do you believe in fate? I snorted. At my age, the only thing I believe in is a bad back and overpriced groceries. She chuckled. That's what I thought you'd say. Then, she leaned forward, fingers tapping against the rim of her glass. Let me ask you something else. Have you ever wondered why I picked you? The question caught me off guard. Picked me? She gestured around the room. I've lived here for years, Frank. People come and go. They smile politely, they gossip, they move on. But you intrigued me. I narrowed my eyes. Intrigued, how? She took a sip of whiskey, her gaze steady. You remind me of a character I once wrote. Someone who thought his story was over. Something in my chest tightened. You don't know anything about my story, I muttered. She smiled. Don't I? And then she did something that made my breath catch. She reached behind her chair, pulled out an old leather-bound book, and handed it to me. I opened it, scanning the first page. Frank Sullivan had never considered himself a remarkable man. But fate had other plans for him. I looked up sharply. This is my name. She nodded. Yes, it is. My hands tightened around the book. You wrote about me? Her expression softened. I started writing about you before I even knew you. And then one day, you moved in next door. That's when I realized, sometimes life hands you the exact person you need, even when you don't know you need them. My mouth felt dry. And what exactly do I need? She smiled, lifting her glass. A new story. I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Hope. And maybe, just maybe, Eleanor was right. Maybe my story wasn't over yet. I should have left. Any rational man would have. But there I was, sitting in Eleanor's armchair, whiskey in hand, staring at a book that had my name printed in ink long before we ever met. I ran my fingers over the cover, feeling the worn leather. So let me get this straight. You wrote this before I even moved in? Eleanor took a slow sip of her drink. I started it years ago. The story came to me one night, like they always do. A man, widowed, alone, convinced his life was winding down. Then one day something, or someone changes that. She set her glass down, watching me carefully. When I saw you, Frank, I knew. You were him. You were the story. A cold shiver ran through me. It wasn't fear exactly. More like the unsettling feeling of looking in a mirror and seeing someone else's reflection staring back. I flipped through the pages. Descriptions of a man who sounded suspiciously like me, down to the coffee and newspaper mornings, the whiskey-drenched evenings, the way he avoided people like they were landmines. My mouth felt dry. And how does it end? Eleanor smirked. That's the problem. I never finished it. I looked up. Why not? She hesitated, swirling the amber liquid in her glass. Because I didn't know how. The story was about a man who thought his best days were behind him. But I didn't want to write a tragedy, Frank. I wanted him to prove himself wrong. And I didn't know how to do that until you showed up. Silence settled between us. The weight of her words pressed against me like an invisible force. I had spent years convincing myself that my story had already been told, that I was nothing more than an epilogue, waiting for the final period to be placed on the last sentence. But Eleanor? She saw something else, and that scared the hell out of me. I exhaled slowly. So what? You've been watching me? Taking notes? She didn't flinch. Observing, yes. But mostly I was waiting. For what? She leaned forward, her piercing gaze locking onto mine. For you to realize you're still the main character in your own damn life. I opened my mouth to respond, probably with some smart-ass remark, but the words never came. Because deep down, a part of me wondered if she was right. And that terrified me more than anything. In the weeks that followed, something shifted. I still had my morning coffee, but now Eleanor would appear on her porch, book in hand, pretending not to watch me. I still read the newspaper, but now I found myself wondering what she would say about the headlines. And for the first time in years, I wasn't just existing. I was living. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I knocked on her door. No hesitation this time. She opened it with a knowing smile. Whiskey? I held up a bottle of my own. Thought I'd bring my own supply, since you're clearly trying to deplete yours. She laughed, a full, unrestrained sound that made my chest ache in a way I didn't quite understand. As we settled into our usual chairs, I placed the book, the unfinished manuscript, on the table between us. I read it, I said. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. And? I took a slow breath. I think you were right. She leaned back. I usually am. I rolled my eyes. I meant about the ending. About how it wasn't finished because maybe it wasn't supposed to be. She tilted her head, considering me. Go on. I tapped my fingers against the book's spine. You wrote about a man who thought his story was over. But the truth is, no one's story is over until it is. Maybe life isn't about rewriting the past. Maybe it's about turning the page, even when you don't know what comes next. For the first time since I met her, Eleanor looked genuinely surprised. Then slowly she smiled. "Frank Sullivan," she murmured. "You might just be a writer after all." I chuckled. "Let's not get carried away." She reached for her glass, raising it slightly. "To unfinished stories, then." I lifted mine in return. "To new chapters." We clinked glasses, and for the first time in longer than I cared to admit, I felt something I thought I had lost forever. Hope. The next morning, as I stepped onto my porch, I caught sight of Eleanor standing by her red door. But something was different. A can of blue paint sat at her feet. I smirked. "A little dramatic, don't you think?" She shrugged. Red was getting old. I nodded toward my own front door. "Maybe I'll do the same." She grinned. "Good. We match now." And just like that, I realized something. Life wasn't about waiting for the final page. It was about choosing to keep writing. And with that thought, I picked up my brush and painted my door blue. Eleanor finished her book. When it was published, the dedication read, "For Frank, proof that the best stories never truly end." And me? Well, let's just say I finally started living mine.